Exceptions in C#, like in any other programming language, refer to problems or errors in your code. Exceptions are a mechanism used to handle runtime errors or exceptional conditions that may occur during the execution of the program. When an error occurs, an exception is thrown, and if the exception is not handled, the program terminates and an error message is displayed. And in this video, we're gonna see what we can use in C# to handle these exceptions. While coding different projects, it is very common for us to make different kind of mistakes. One of the most common mistakes or errors that we do while coding are the syntax errors. In this simple line of code here, if I, for example, forget to close the line with a semicolon and I try to run the program would not allow me to, because as we can see here, we see the error which basically says that a semicolon is expected there. But errors may happen also when the program is running. When a user is using our program, an error occurs, and then the user may just get this long text of errors, of cryptic error, and the program would stop. And this is actually a case that we need to handle, and we need to prevent this from happening. This is what we'll basically see in this video. I'm just gonna leave this line of code here as it is, and underneath I'm just gonna make our program so that it takes input or a number from the user, and I'm actually gonna store it in an integer variable. I'm naming it number, and I'm gonna use the console.readLine method here. But as we have seen also before, this method just takes a string. For us to convert what we take from this method into an integer, I'm just going to use the convert to int32 method. Convert. And underneath I'm just going to also print this variable to the console. Let me just run the program firstly. And we see the prompt here, enter number. If I enter a correct number, let's say 45, 45 will be printed out and the program ends. But if I try again to enter, let's say, a string, which is basically just a sequence of text, we will see this long cryptic message here. We can understand it here that the input string is not in the correct format. But this shouldn't happen to a user. This kind of error and this kind of message shouldn't be in this way. And there is a way for us to actually manage this in C#. In C#, we use the try and catch blocks. So basically for each part of code, each piece of code where we think that an error may occur, we actually put this code inside a try block. Let me just input all of this code here. And after the try block, we can write multiple catch blocks. So what the catch blocks do is they actually detect exceptions and let us do something specific after detecting this exception. There are different kinds of exceptions that we can catch with these catch blocks. And we can actually specify the exceptions that we are looking for. Let's say I'm looking for a format exception. We can see if that's why the error occurred. I'm just giving a name to the variable like e. And each time this kind of error happens, we want to print something out of the console. We could just print a custom message here, but I can also just print out, just use this e variable here and use this message method which just basically prints out the message of the error. Not all of these lines, of all of these cryptic lines, but basically the main message that the error has. And let me just try and run the code again. So in this case, this try block here, the program, when it goes to the try block, it checks for an exception and then it goes to this catch block. So let me just write a piece of text again. We will see this message printed out to the console, which is the input string is not in the correct format. And as I said, after the program reads the try block here, and it tries to get an integer from the user, an error occurs, and that's why the program goes to this catch block. It sees that this is a format exception, and for this reason, this message will be printed out. But even though the text is more understandable and it's shorter, still that's not a good user interface, or it's not a good implementation of the program, because the user may just make a mistake, just a typing mistake, and we would want for the user to try and input again the right data. So what we can do in this case is actually just put this whole try and catch block inside the while loop, so that the user will try and input the correct the data until it is the data that is required from the program. So I'm just making the condition here true. So the while loop will run as long as we break out of the loop, as long as we decide to break out of the loop. So I'm just cutting this code, inputting it inside this while loop, and we want for the program to actually break out of the loop if this input here is correct. So after the program reads this line here, then it takes the input from the user. If the input is not an integer, then the program goes to this catch block, and then the while loop runs again. The prompt will ask the user again to input a number, and if the number inputted by the user is an integer, actually, we want to break out of the loop in this part here, so that the user won't be asked again to input a number. Let us just try the program here. Enter a number. If I enter a correct number, we just see the number is printed out here, and the program breaks out of the loop. But if I enter a string again, we'll see the error message here that's printed out. The input is not in the correct format, and then the user is asked again to input a number. If I input a text again, we will be still asked to input a number. And if I write a number, then the number is printed out and the program basically ends. We can write as many catch blocks here as we want. Just the logic behind it is that the program just reads the catch blocks from top to bottom. And if one catch block has the actual exception, then the program just executes the one catch block, and the other ones won't be executed or will be ignored, even if they are valid as well. So for this reason, the logic behind this is that we want to write the most specific cases or the most specific exceptions on top, and then on the bottom, let's say we want to write like a general exception, which is done by this exception keyword here. So this catch block here is just a general exception, which basically gives us a general error message. Sometimes the error message is correct, but sometimes this block does not print out the specific error that occurs in the case. For this reason, this is like mostly recommended to be inputted at the end. And I can actually just, let's say we want to have another exception, like another kind is divide by zero exception, which just catches exceptions where division is done by zero. In this case, this will basically not happen actually, but let me just do something here. Let us just print out to the console, let's say 4 divided by the number, and let me run the program. I will enter number. If I enter 4, the result is 1. But if I enter 0, we see this error message attempted to divide by 0. So the program firstly checks the first catch block. It's not a format exception. And then it checks the second block of catch. The exception actually happened because it was a division by 0. So the message is printed out to the console, and the program just runs the loop from the beginning. In the case when let's say the exception was not a format exception or division by 0, then the program would run the last block of code. So in our case here, if I enter the correct number, we should see that 4 divided by 47, it's 0. The last thing for this video is that you can also write another block of code in this try and catch blocks, the finally block. So the finally block is the block that is executed in all cases. So even if the program catches an exception, this block of code here will be executed, and even in the cases when the program won't catch an exception. So normally this block of code is used, for example, in those cases when we want to reset a variable, or when some files are opened, we want to close a file. But in our case, I'm just printing out like a custom message, let's say block of code ended. If I run the program here, let me input a correct number. We see firstly the result here, and then the block of code ended. If I run the program again, I'm inputting a text. We see the error message, then we see again this block of code, the message in the finally block here getting printed out. So the block of code ended, and we are asked to input a number again. So this was it for this video. This was the main syntax you need to know in order to handle exceptions in C#. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.